What are we going to talk about today? I have no ideas.
An entire episode where we do nothing but discuss the logic of cars.
In a world where the last thing we needed was more podcasts, we present to you the pods we cast along the way.
Have you seen my mug?
I have seen your mug. I'm immediately jealous. No donkey Kong mug.
I wanted to get a Cuphead mug that's Mugman. Um, but they're enormous. They're like the size of a cereal bowl. And it's like I can't drink out of that.
Does Cuphead have liquid in him?
Yes,
Is he always hold?
there's liquid in his cup and we do not know what it is.
Oh God,
But whatever it is, he pours moonshine into it at the beginning of the game. In the opening cinematic
that's
when
right.
they're like going on to take on the devil
Hmm.
to get out of their soul contract.
Hmm.
There's a frame where he's just like pouring like a jug of liquor into his cup. So I like to think that they're just raging drunk on moonshine the entire time, and that's what fuels their escapades.
Maybe they're not actually like animated like Cuphead. Maybe they're just people on moonshine,
They're just
and
in
that's just
mascot
how they
suits.
see it.
Cuphead is one of those games where it's like I wish it was more than just a boss rush.
Yeah, but the bosses are the best part of
The
Cuphead.
bosses are the best part of Cuphead because the run and gun segments suck.
The ring gun segments are awful.
It's a fun game and I love the aesthetic. I would like to see them do more with it. I would like to see maybe
Hmm.
like a Kirby style like Nightmare in Dreamland type game of
Hmm.
Cuphead. Um,
Oh yeah,
keep the
I'd get
bosses
with that.
right, like because Kirby had
Yeah.
bosses in them too. They had mini bosses
Hmm.
and they had like big like level bosses.
Hmm.
And I think you could have a lot of fun doing that with Cuphead. But it had like that was another one of those indie games that had a really long development cycle because of just how hard it is to animate everything.
Yeah.
It was sort of a Fez
Yeah.
situation
Hmm.
where
Where they just had to keep remaking and.
yeah, no, they if you look at like beta footage of their like beta gameplay from the year they announced it versus like what we got, it's so amazing how much progress the team made. It's always funny
It's
like
night and
these
day.
these teams are like, we want to do this style of a game. We've never done it, so let's
Hmm.
do it. And they
Yeah,
can end up being some of the best games that get released. But I do think
that's
Cuphead
right.
rests on its laurels as a game more on its art style and its controls than it does
Hmm.
as a game because there's still some horseshit in how that game plays.
There always is. With I don't know if there's like a perfect run gun game.
Mm,
Can you think of one? My
Contra,
favorite growing up was what was it?
Contra, maybe.
I like Contra. Yeah, I've played Contra 4. Contra 4 is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I like Alien Hominid as a kid. Did you ever play
Hmm.
Alien Hominid?
Yeah, Alien Hominid's a great
Uh,
one. I always think of Super
yeah,
Meat
it's
Boy
fun.
when I think of Alien Hominid, but actually the team who did Alien Hominid did Castle Crashers, right? Like that was their follow up.
Yeah, that's the Newgrounds team. Those are all Newgrounds games.
Yeah. Newgrounds is
Like
kind of
all of
like the
Newgrounds.
unsung hero of a lot of indie favorite stuff. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Newgrounds gave birth to the whole Oni team, who've gone on to do all sorts of stuff. Um,
Absolutely.
Alien
And then
Hominid,
Ego
Castle
Raptor
Crashers.
and
Yeah, yeah. That
something the Newman dance came from Newgrounds.com.
I feel like
Um,
Newgrounds was sort of the home for all of that content before YouTube became a thing, right? Like when YouTube got really big, it became the conglomerate for all of that sort of stuff.
yeah, I still think I don't think um I don't think any other website has perfected um like the animation hub outside of like that era of Newgrounds. I don't even know if like Newgrounds is I kind of think Newgrounds like their deal might be games more than movies now. But
Yeah, like
now if you want
flash-based
to be
games and things like that.
yeah, the reason why all the big animators of like that era aren't animating anymore is because to be an animator on YouTube is not nearly as rewarding like financially as it was, which
No.
is really sad because people like Aaron Hansen like are great animators or were great animators,
Hmm.
and now they're all let's players.
Yeah, it's funny. they say, like, have a job to support doing what you love. If you can do both, that's amazing. But I am not angry that you have those Let's Players out there, because they still provide really entertaining content.
Oh yeah.
In more rapid fire production. But it's funny to see sort of the dichotomy between the mindset of the Only Plays fan base and the Game Grumps fan base. And the Game Grumps fan base just seems to hate Game Grumps. And the Only Plays fan base is surprisingly, like, no, I won't go so far as to say they're wholesome, but they definitely channel the don't give a fuck chaotic energy of that channel. And I think that's why I've kind of migrated from Game Grumps over to Only Plays more recently. It's just you start listening to it and you're like, video games and just screaming the entire time, but it gets a little more nuanced than that.
Well, sure. I mean, what I like about their stuff is they usually cut through stuff. Like, it's not just people trying to like fill time forever. Like, it's kind of like the hits.
Yeah.
Which is how it should be. I don't think anyone's that interesting, except for maybe like a handful of people that could just keep going and going and going.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't think they've ever done I think the longest series they ever did was Crash Bandicoot, and even then, that's only like 20 videos. Game Grumps has like 40 video segments on like games, and it's just like, stop playing this game.
And now, I think recently they've stopped that. I think now they're doing like, now they'll do like the first 2 episodes, and then they'll live stream the rest. So if you want to watch the rest, like, you can watch it all in like a long 5-hour cut, because for some reason that's more lucrative for them.
Yeah,
that's the reason they do it. Like, after like 2 episodes, like, viewership goes way down.
Yeah. So naturally we decided to get in on that and do a podcast.
So we decided to do a podcast / Let's Play.
This is now a Let's Play podcast.
Yeah, this is now a Let's Play podcast. Here we go.
Oh, you got me.
Oh, I got you.
Oh. Funny joke.
Hey, look at this guy. Look how he looks like.
Let's intro the fucking show. We've been rambling for 40 minutes. Do you want to pull the nuclear lever and talk about the logic of the Cars universe?
I kind of feel like...
Or is that like a 15 episode in thing where we've got, where we've got them fooled?
I think if one of us wants to pull that chute, we can. And then the other one will just be like, yes, we're doing this now. We're going to talk about cars for 15 minutes. And then that'll be it. I've only seen 1.5 Cars movie. Did anyone see 3? Did 3 even come out?
3 did really well. 3 actually kind of redeemed the franchise.
Did it? Was it kind of Rocky-ish?
So basically you had people really hate on Cars. I have a soft spot for Cars because I saw it with my dad over a summer, and that was a summer that I was doing a lot of Boy Scout stuff, so I was away from home a lot. And I was about to go on like a week-long camping trip, and it was the longest I had been on my own from home up to that point. I think I was 15 at the time. And so my dad and I decided one night, it was like I came home from one thing, and then I had to go like to another thing. And so my dad was like, hey, you want to go see a movie? It's like, yeah, what do you want to go see? And so we decided to go see Cars. And I just have a really positive memory of seeing that movie with my dad. Plus, I actually think Cars is a good movie. I think it gets a lot of hate because people think it's very bland, but I like the story. I think it's a good, character arc kind of story. I think people get hung up more on the animation and like the premise of what the movie is as opposed to what it actually represents. And it's weird to talk positively of the Big J, the Big JL, because of all the stuff that happened. But that was a big passion project of his because he had just come off of doing. I can't remember which movie came before it. It may have been Incredibles or something like that. But he had just come off of a really high-profile picture, and he was really burned out. So his wife was like, "Hey, let's go take a road trip." And so they decided to road trip Route 66, and that's sort of where he got, the passion for, the traveling the lost highways of the United States and like seeing all those landmarks and things, and sort of the melancholy nature of the fact that we've sacrificed some historical stuff for convenience. And the whole point of the movie was sort of mirrored his life experience at the time, which was like you got to stop and smell the roses and like slow down, or you're gonna miss some cool stuff. And regardless of what he is now, I can appreciate that message. That's why I like that movie.
Separate art from the artist.
Yeah. Actually, let's talk about that. Let's talk about separating the art from the artist. But before we do, I just wanted to, because you were asking me like about the series as a whole. Cars 2 is a movie made to sell toys. That is. It is Pixar selling out. The character Mater.
Yeah, they make him a secret agent. Basically, after the first Cars movie, they did a series of short segments called Mater's Tall Tales, where it was like he tells tall tales about like his life escapades and like, are they true? Are they not true? Like, you decide. And they're cute little shorts. They're fine. Oh, sure.
You can tell Larry the Cable Guy really likes that role because he keeps returning to it. And Cars 2 is basically let's take a 5-minute short segment and stretch it out over an hour and a half, and it's very, very bad.
This sounds to me like it was less of a Pixar movie and more of like a Disney Channel movie, like a Disney Channel quality movie. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it's like Disney Channel meets like a direct-to-video sequel. It is
Sure.
the lowest rated Pixar film, and it feels the least appropriate for a Pixar film.
Okay.
Because even Pixar sequels are really good, right? Like I still believe Toy Story 2 is the best Toy Story in the franchise.
I agree with you.
And as much as I liked 3 and even 4, a lot of people I think were just going in preparing to hate 4, but I really liked it because I like how they kind of wrapped up that arc in a way. It was completely unnecessary, but I still enjoyed it. But I guess Cars 3 kind of redeemed that, but Cars 2 is just a black spot on the portfolio that is Pixar.
Yeah. Well, I heard mixed things about Good Dinosaur when it came out. I never saw Good Dinosaur.
I'm actually kind of behind on my Pixar. I haven't seen Good Dinosaur. I haven't seen Incredibles 2. I haven't seen Finding Dory. I haven't seen Coco. Like, there are movies on that list that I really want to get to, and now that we're in quarantine, maybe that's a good time to do it.
Coco.
I love The Incredibles, so I'm really excited.
Incredibles 2, I think hits the mark. Finding Nemo is like my favorite. I think we've talked about this. Finding Nemo is my Pixar movie. Like that's the one that I really love.
Don't you and I? We should talk about this on the show now, though. There's no Pixar movie I hate. If I had to use the word hate, I would say it's Cars 2. Finding Nemo is very, very low on my list, but Bug's Life is very high. And for you,
I know
you, Ryan, who are being very good and restrained from unloading on me, it's the opposite. You don't like A Bug's Life, and you love Finding Nemo. So
I do.
Let's talk about that.
Love it. Let's do it. Let's get into it right now. Cue the intro music.
The song from Toy Story. The song from Toy Story. It's a story about some toys that come to life for a little boy. Blah, 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 yada, yada, toys. It's the song from Toy Story. You're watching Toy Story.
Oh, intro music. You're making it really hard for me to find royalty-free music for all of this. So Ryan, let's talk about Pixar a little bit. I know we were gonna we'll segue into our other conversation, but for now we're talking Pixar here on the show. What's your reasoning for Finding Nemo being one of your favorites?
Finding Nemo is one of, we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the origins of certain Pixar movies and how a lot of it comes from personal experience with the creators.
Mm-hmm.
Finding Nemo is created by an animator for Pixar named Andrew Stanton, who would eventually move on to. I think he actually had a big part in A Bug's Life as an assistant director.
Mm-hmm.
Could be wrong about that. He went on to do WALL-E. He went on to do the Finding Dory, Finding Nemo sequel. Um, he's always a big co-writer for like if it's a really great Pixar movie, Andrew Stanton is probably involved. He also did a movie called John Carter, which we don't talk about.
Did you
But
ever see John Carter?
I saw I saw John Carter and then fell asleep when he went to Mars and then woke up when he came back from Mars.
Are you kidding me? So you
So
missed.
to me, John Carter was about a guy who went in a shed
And then it came out.
and
of the
eventually
shed.
like his nephew or something let him out. I don't know. But there was no Mars.
If you ever want to see one of the best half in the bag intros on Red Letter Media, go watch
Yeah.
Mike set up for John Carter when they review it on their show.
Yeah.
I saw that movie as a fluke with my buddy when we were on spring break. And all I can tell you is I remember about as much as you do. I remember there was a shed, there was some old-timey westernness, and then he went to Mars, and then some stuff happened, and then he saved the day, and then he came out of the shed.
See, I missed all the stuff about saving the day. I think I kind of remember him jumping really high.
Yeah.
I may have
Yeah, there's a whole thing where he like has
fluttered
to
awake.
adjust to the gravity on Mars, and
Okay, all
Yeah.
right, it's fun.
yeah, it's got some
fun.
good ideas. Like, but it's one of those pitfalls of like we want to adapt a really old property to a modern audience, and those things have a very hard time translating.
Yes.
Um,
Is Bryan Cranston in John Carter?
I don't fucking remember. I don't even remember who the main actor was.
I don't.
Brian, no,
I-
you're
I-
probably thinking of the really shitty Total Recall remake that had Bryan Cranston in it,
I think that also. I think.
and it also had
some-
Mars in it. I think no, it didn't even have Mars. It was like, God, that movie sucked.
Somebody's in John Carter as like an old timey prospector or something.
No, he's like a bandit or something, and then he stumbles upon a cave with a
Bryan
space.
Cranston as Colonel Powell.
Oh, I'll
yeah,
be
he's
damned.
a Union colonel. He's a colonel.
Oh,
Yeah, they put him in like a mustache. They Godzilla him early on.
yeah. Even Bryan Cranston couldn't save that movie.
No. Oh, anyway, I'm not here to talk about John Carter.
this is another one of our
Spencer.
famous digression rants.
One of our famous digressions. I'm not doing a John Carter podcast with you, Spencer. I'm trying to talk to you about why I love Finding Nemo.
This is
Finding
my
Nemo.
strategy. I'm just going to keep distracting you from talking about Finding Nemo.
And it won't happen because when I'm done telling you where the inspiration of Finding Nemo came from, I'm going to tell you what the inspiration for A Bug's Life came from. Finding Nemo was created by Andrew Stanton. Andrew Stanton wanted to take his son to the zoo or the aquarium or the park or something.
Okay.
But basically wanted a date with his son, but went out and discovered that he was so overprotective of his son that he didn't really allow his son to do anything. He didn't allow him to like go off and do whatever. He didn't allow him to kind of like explore. He had to keep him with him, and because of that, his son didn't have a good time, and because of that, he didn't have a good time. So he kind of realized the double-edged sword of like that overprotection came from, and he wondered if he was doing his son a service by being that father, and that's where the inspiration of the movie came from. Finding Nemo works very well as that story because it starts with that relationship and then it splits off into two very different arcs
Mhm.
that both kind of flow together very, very well to the point where every scene in Finding Nemo is important.
Mhm.
Every scene in Finding Nemo leads to something else. I'm willing to bet that somebody that hasn't seen Finding Nemo in a long time could probably go beat by beat and tell you everything that happens because there's this chain of events that goes through. We were also talking about Back to the Future earlier. Back to the Future also does this. Everything in Back to the Future early on is setup. The setups for Finding Nemo happen along the way. It's a great adventure movie. I would put it up there with Raiders of the Lost Ark as the way that it just ties together and it keeps action moving. The only places where action stops is when a character is knocked unconscious. And so it's this double hero's journey that flows together. So by the time these characters reunite,
Mhm.
they're two different people, and they're able to go about and take on like a new challenge in a way that they couldn't before because of their relationship. It's the pathos are great, the voice acting's great. I think the humor is also holds up. I know you have your thoughts about the humor. I know you think it's bathroom humor, but it's a
No,
kids
not bad.
movie.
I'll explain my thoughts on it. But
But
go ahead. Keep talking.
you're sitting here with like a journal.
I was
Just
taking notes.
um, I, uh, I think it holds up because the structure of it holds up. The structure of that movie is one of the most well crafted stories I've seen. Um, because of that, they were able to do that double story and tie it together and flow it so well that just stacked on top of each other without ever having a lull in the action.
Yeah.
And like I said, in every scene, like the character of Marlon, every scene he learns something.
Okay.
Or every scene Dory learns something. One of these characters learns something in a way, so when the next thing happens, they react to it differently. Like there's a scar on Dory now, so now Marlon like remembers a way that he reacted before, and now he's gonna like learn to like trust her a little better next time.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end, it's just sweet. It's funny.
It's a movie about family.
It's a movie about family. How dare you? Anyway.
No, that's a very very thoughtful deconstruction, and I do not disagree with you on the main points of structure. Structurally, I think like all of those Pixar movies that now was that one of the Pixar movies that came out of the Pixar lunch?
Yes. Yes, it is.
The Pixar lunch. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of the Pixar lunch was basically there were a handful of animators and writers who got together for a lunch one day. That ended up becoming basically the foundation for the first 5 or 6 Pixar films in their library, and that included Toy Story, Bugs Life, Finding Nemo, WALL-E, and Monsters Inc. Yeah, and you can argue that those are still the ones that are the best of the best.
I'd add Incredibles to that list, but
I would add Incredibles too,
right.
but definitely like those ones that came out of the Pixar lunch, like those are probably the most famous. And it's amazing that so many ideas can come out of one setting when you get the right minds in a room. That's fantastic. You mentioned I didn't like Finding Nemo because of the toilet humor. It's not so much toilet humor, because I'm all for slapstick, and if it's warranted and if it's set up well, that's fine. Fart jokes. A good fart joke will never get old if it's set up correctly, right? Like, but it's not so much that, it's that I find when you get into the writing and the delivery of some of the lines, it's trying too hard to be cutesy. It's like when people write kids and they say like, oh, and they mispronounced this word, haha, isn't that funny that they mispronounced that word, or like, oh, they did this thing, and it's like, I don't know, it just those specifics kind of sour me on it a little bit. But I also haven't seen the movie in a very long time, so maybe I do need to go back. You are right in that I remember, having not seen it very much, I do remember a lot of the beats of that movie.
Yeah.
So
it's structurally sound.
I owe it to you, Ryan, as a co-host and a friend, to give the movie another chance.
There you go.
Anyways, this is why Bug's Life is a better movie than Finding Nemo.
Well, before you go on, I just want to give an example of some cutesy dialogue from Finding Nemo. Here's some cutesy dialogue like only kids would know. Please don't go away. Please. No one's ever stuck with me so long before, and if you leave, I remember things better with you. I do. Look, P. Sherman 42. I remember it. I do. It's there. I know it is, because when I look at you, I can feel it. When I look at you, and I'm home. Please, I don't want that to go away. I don't want to forget. Who could remember? Who could forget that beautiful Dory goodbye scene from Finding Nemo? And how dare you? Look at you. Look at your face. Look at you, your scrunched up face. Look at it scrunching up because you know. Sorry, what were you gonna say about
Yeah, Ryan, but does Finding Nemo have a theme song by Randy Newman?
Wait, theme song for Bug's Life. Does
You know what? Why don't we
is
play
there
it right
rating?
now? This will be our first music break of the episode. This
Okay.
is the theme from Bug's Life by Randy Newman. We'll be right back.
Next, Greg, that movie about bugs. Okay, here we go. It's a bug, tiny bug. I like bugs. Do-do-do-do-do.
Wouldn't have nothing
If I didn't have you. Yeah.
That was actually about like a friendship. You Got a Friend Me is also about friendship.
Yeah, but that's more like about a kid's love for a toy. That one's like they're buddies, you know.
Yes.
If
yeah,
if
they're
I
buddies.
if I was gonna pick a Friends Pixar theme by Randy Newman, of which there are several, I would pick Wouldn't Have Nothing if I didn't have you. For you and me, Ryan, here on the pods we cast along the way.
What would you have if you didn't have me?
Yeah.
This is taking way longer than I'm comfortable with. I didn't like that little smirk that went over your face, fantasizing your life without me. What was? I just imagine like Homer spinning the pistol with Marge dancing in the bikini.
You know what I wouldn't have, Ryan? Nothing
Oh,
if I didn't have
right?
you.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
right? Is that how that works?
These
You know what?
Randy
We'll pretend
Newman
it's wholesome.
double negatives.
Anyways, welcome back, everyone. That was The Time of Your Life by Randy Newman, the theme from A Bug's Life. So let me explain. I'm already setting up a great case for why I like this movie. Is this just becoming like a trope on this show that like I pretend to have really good taste in movies and then I like reveal my personal favorites of things and they're all awful
that's the thing.
choices?
If you're the asshole that comes out and says the best Pixar movie is Toy Story because it was the first one and that's the one that everyone likes, then you don't have an opinion. Like you're just spewing other people's opinions. It's the people like you, Spencer, that have very eclectic tastes. Like you're the ones with actual taste in movies because you know what you like.
Thank you. I would describe it as eclectic. Well, because it wasn't it Dunkey who said that critics, good or bad, consistency is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Because you need to know a person's taste in order to know how they're going to critique something.
Yeah. And because I know that you like A Bug's Life. No. You like A Bug's Life more than any.
Here we go.
More than the other Pixar movies. I know that I'm not going to pay attention to what you have to say.
Well, that's okay because we do have listeners on the show and they'll tune out too. But I'm just going to go for it anyways. So one of the reasons I really like Pixar is would you say that it's fair that growing up in the 90s, a lot of the male role models were carryovers from the 80s in which a male role model was someone who was full of machismo and masculinity and was like a tough guy and like all that. Would you say that's fair? It's for a lot of the way that male figures were portrayed in media and male heroes
I wouldn't know
were
I'm
portrayed.
15 years old, but I could assume that yes. No, I would agree. Yes.
The reason I liked movies like Pixar movies, Toy Story and A Bug's Life both is because their protagonists were not that. Because growing up, I wasn't a super machismo kid. I didn't watch Power Rangers. I didn't want to like get into playground fights. Like I was a very mild kid. I was kind of shy, kind of timid. And one of the reasons I like A Bug's Life is because it has a hero who is intellectual and is not traditionally machismo, and he can still be clever and save the day by working together with other people and not just being like, I'm gonna kick everybody's ass. It's like you've got Woody, who's also not that character, and then you have Buzz, who's more like prototypical like action hero guy, and there's conflict in that too because it's like two worlds coming together. Bug's Life borrows, if we're talking structure, borrows very heavily from the film Seven Samurai, which kind of follows the same plot beats, where it's about a village, in this case an ant colony, that is besieged by raiders. The Mandalorian would lift this many years later for one of their episodes as well, so it's a winning formula, as we've seen. Yeah, it is a trope, but they do it in a fun way, and I also think the character designs in A Bug's Life are also very fun. There's a lot of fun that they have with the fact that Francis is a ladybug, so everybody treats him like a lady, and then and they're voiced by Dennis Leary. It's a very like hard-edged character, and so that's a lot of fun. It's got one of John Ratzenberger's best performances as P.T. Flea.
Yeah.
It's very creative in the way that it sets up its settings, bringing things down to a bug's sized scale of everything. And so I really like the way that story's structured. I would say that just like Finding Nemo, this is in the golden age of Pixar where every event has a purpose and leads to another thing. And in this movie, in Finding Nemo, there are things that happen that aren't necessarily a direct result of the character's actions. In this one, in Bug's Life, I think pretty much everything that does happen is a direct result of
Very
what
fair.
Flick does. Everything from start to finish is because of his
Mhm.
screw ups. And I think that's a good movie to show kids as a learning lesson that it's like it's okay to fail and it's okay to screw up, but he does his best to make up for it. Even to the point where they want to kick him out of the colony because they find out that he's like, fooled them into thinking, because he goes out looking for warrior bugs to protect the colony, and he brings them back and finds out that they're circus performers out of a job, and there's like this misunderstanding that they think they're going to like do a show for the colony, and so now they have to pretend that they're like these heroes, and then they get rumbled for that, and they find out, and they still have to end up like pulling together and save the day. And I think it's a very good movie. I also appreciate, it's amazing to see how far the animation quality goes. From people say like, oh, Bug's Life like doesn't look great. It's like, have you seen the first Toy
Oh,
Story? It's a
yeah,
great,
but
amazing movie, but the animation is
no,
very rough.
there's a very
and
good
in
reason why everyone in Toy Story has very short hair.
it's because you can't do hair. I remember when Monsters Inc. came out and they did the fur on Sully. It was
Yeah.
like a
Oh my God.
revelation.
Remind me to circle back to, or maybe I'll just tell it now. There's in the script for Incredibles, there's something that they scripted that they couldn't do at the end. Like there was no animator like on their team that had the know-how to do the thing that Brad Bird wanted to do, which is he wanted one of Jack Jack's transformations at the end when Syndrome is holding him. He wanted Jack to be able to melt through his fingers, and nobody could do that. Now, like I kind of feel like you could do it because of everything that goes on. I think like Frozen's like a great example of like what you could do with a movie with like the snow effects and like how they can like do everything. But it's interesting to me that like even like back then, like when we look back at kids, like you could do anything if it's in a cartoon, but there were still things
Yeah.
they were figuring out.
It's interesting you mentioned Frozen. Frozen and Tangled both. Frozen had a historically long production history because it started out as a 2D animation back when Walt Disney was still alive. They wanted to, adapt the story of the Snow Queen. And it just kept, changing and mutating and things as animation techniques got different and the story kept getting tweaked, and they finally landed on something that worked. But what's interesting is we're talking about animation techniques. They actually had to create their own engine for the snow in Frozen, because no animation engine existed to render snow's behavior the way that snow behaved. Same, I think, for the sand in Moana and the water in Moana. But Tangled as well. They wanted to do a Rapunzel story for well over a decade, but it started off as a 2D animation, and then they switched to 3D. But the tech was not there to render her hair out the way that they needed it to get it to behave the way they did. It's funny that Tangled and Brave both came out around the same time, and they were both praised for their hair physics.
The like it's so cool to like see that that's an interesting that's still like evolving like pretty well. Would it be fair to say that they went into the unknown?
What's a better movie, Frozen or Tangled?
It's a very good question. Actually, I think Tangled.
I think so too. Moving on. No, I think Frozen had the more commercial success, but you ask, the majority of people are going to say Tangled is objectively better.
Yeah, well, I also think that I think that Tangled has a little more, like, you and I are both men. I think.
So let's talk about why the female heroines are best represented in each of these. We're very well qualified.
I mean, no, I think Tangled is purposefully more catered to boys and girls. I think Frozen is very catered to girls. I think there might be a reason, like, we watched the movie and we have a lot of fun with like all of this like goofy slapstick with like Flynn Rider and the horse and all this stuff. And I think both movies are good, though. A lot of people like to hate Frozen.
Oh, I don't hate Frozen. When I worked at the parks, I was part of the opening crew for front of house that opened the Frozen stage show, Frozen Live at the Hyperion. I've seen that stage show enough that I never have to see it again. There were days where I saw that show 2 or 3 times.
I apologize, and I think you know what it. I think you know
You
what it means
should.
to be like a parent of like a kid that
Yep.
likes Frozen, because I think they have to deal with the
Yep.
same Frozen
After all this
hell.
time, though, Ryan, I've learned to uh, build a snowman. So
You
I've
finally
moved
learned how.
past it.
Did they ever learn how to build a snowman?
No, I don't even think they explain how Olaf is alive. They just kind of
Yeah.
gloss over that
Oh,
one.
you've seen Frozen 2, right?
No, I'm way behind on like all of my
Oh
Disney
dang.
stuff. I got to get caught up this weekend.
It's on Disney Plus now. You gotta check it out.
Does an episode go by where we don't plug Disney Plus, or is
We're
it just
just
so
we're
prominent
just
in
well, I
everybody's
mean,
lives?
my check's in the mail. I don't know if you've gotten yours yet. Like, did you get your check?
No.
I
No,
I
I'm
want
still
to I want to go back to Bug's Life because I have an apology for you, Spencer. Like I want you to know that I do actually enjoy A Bug's Life. I enjoyed it as a kid. Like it's a good movie. I prefer it to
Yeah.
Ants. Remember
Oh, ants.
Ants?
I do. I saw both. I had VHS copies of both, but I always
I
preferred
had
Bug's
VHS
Life.
copies of both, and I watched one once. Guess which one? Ants was odd. Ants.
Ants was. Ants went for the more realistic approach of the bug based
Yes.
films. That was that weird period of time where there was the schism in the Disney animation, and a lot of people jumped ship to go over to DreamWorks, and there were people with insider info who kind of knew what the roadmap for Disney projects were. So DreamWorks was releasing like their
Yeah.
competitors side by side with Disney. It's like, oh, Disney's releasing, a Toy Story movie. Let's release Shrek, which is our flagship animation. Shrek 2 and Toy Story 2 came out around the same time. Though I think Shrek and Shrek 2 are still good movies.
Yeah. Yep.
I think they still hold up. Road to El Dorado, I think
Yeah.
holds
Yeah,
up pretty well. Prince of Egypt. Prince of Egypt is regarded as one of like the best 2D
The
animations
soundtrack
of
for
all
Prince
time.
of Egypt is so good.
Yeah, and I think that came out around the time Tarzan did, if I'm not
I would put
mistaken.
Prince of Egypt above Tarzan. I think Prince of Egypt is better. Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely would put Prince of Egypt. I mean, Tarzan's got a great soundtrack too. Phil Collins is
yeah.
rocking out on that, but yeah, it's interesting how you kind of had those competitors, and then Disney decided to get into the 3D animation game and came out with Chicken Little.
I have a story about Chicken Little.
I have a
Tell me
story about
yours
Chicken Little
first.
too. So I got really excited for Chicken Little based on the trailers because I was young and I was an idiot. I saw Chicken Little for my birthday with a group of friends, and it sucked, and I hated it. It was the longest 70 minutes of my life.
That movie's 70 minutes long.
I think so, but it's just so boring. If it's not 70 minutes, it feels like 2 hours. It's got one of the worst father figures in cinematic history. Buck Cluck. Have you seen the meme that's like, I would strangle Buck Cluck if I got the chance?
I remember it was JD from Scrubs,
Yeah, as Chicken Little.
and then the Ugly Duckling, and they had a pig friend that sang karaoke.
Are you ready
Yeah.
for this, Ryan?
Uh-huh.
Chicken Little, 1 hour and 21 minutes.
Mm.
So that's not where my story ends, though. So I had a friend who was having their birthday get together the same day as me, and they saw Chicken Little.
Oh.
I had to sit through Chicken Little twice in one day.
Oh, no.
I've never watched that
Oh,
movie
no.
since.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah. I think I remember your Chicken Little story, so
Well, to
let's hear it.
recap, when I was a kid, my grandmother took myself and my sister to go see Chicken Little, and we sat near the front, and in kind of like an empty theater because I think it was a little later in the run of the movie, and this older gentleman came alone and sat directly behind us, and throughout the entire movie, every time Buck Cluck would show up on screen, he would go, "Yeah, you're a big chicken, aren't you?"
Oh no! Can you lean it a little closer to the mic and say
Yeah,
that
you're a
again?
big chicken. Huh?
And then like Chicken
Oh,
Little would be getting in
no.
trouble because he was saying that the sky was falling, and then he would go like, "Yeah, you're being a bad little chicken now, aren't you?"
That is
real.
not
That
real.
is
He
real.
did
You
not.
could ask my sister. That happened, and then after my grandmother kind of like scurried us out, and then like talked to like an employee, like go talk to that person and make sure they're okay.
Oh no.
So I have never seen.
How sweet of your grandma to say make
Yeah.
sure they're okay and not get this person
Yeah,
thrown in
but
jail.
I've also never seen Chicken Little since
Oh.
because of that.
So we were scarred
We've
for
got
very different reasons.
But I wonder if Chicken Little wasn't very critically acclaimed. Maybe that's why. Maybe everyone just had experiences with Chicken Little that were negative.
No, Chicken Little is objectively terrible though. It's a bad story. Like we're talking about we're nitpicking, we're scraping for reasons to dislike Finding Nemo or Bug's Life, and I've qualified by saying I do not dislike Finding Nemo. It's just lower on my list of preferred Pixar movies.
Sure.
Objectively, I think Finding Nemo
Yeah.
is a very good movie. I can certainly appreciate the merits, and vice versa for Bug's Life. Right? Just because it's not our favorite doesn't mean
Definitely.
we hate it. But that's not how society works these days. If you don't like it,
Yeah.
you hate it.
There's
It's just one way or the other. There's no gray. Chicken Little, I think, is objectively terrible, though. But it's basically, if I remember the story correctly, it's that Chicken Little has a freak out that creates a town incident that causes some collateral damage in the town, and he becomes an outcast because the town freaks out. It's like a Boy Who Cried
Yes.
Wolf's story, right? Well, it is the story of Chicken Little. He thinks the sky is falling, and it turns out it isn't because, go figure, he's a young kid with an anxiety disorder and has a panic attack, and instead of being like, oh, it's okay to like be afraid, but don't be alarmist, the town is just like, fuck this kid. And his dad turns his back on him because we're talking about not being machismo, like stereotypical athletic young men. I hated that movie for that reason too, because his dad doesn't like him because he's not a baseball star. Butt Cluck is a huge, gigantic, gaping asshole, and I'm gonna believe that. And even when his son has like legitimate evidence as to the sky actually falling, his dad turns his back on him with the rest of the town because he's embarrassed of his son. So by the end of the movie, when he comes around, I'm just like, "Fuck you, dude!" Like, I hate Butt Cluck.
You know what the anti-Chicken Little is? The anti-Chicken Little is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. I also love Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. That's a movie where
I've got a thing for movies with like outcast, weird, dorky, like young protagonists. Like I connect with that so hard, like especially as a younger person, because that was me. Like I wasn't athletic, I wasn't machismo. Like I didn't want to do, like the closest thing I got to doing athletics was Boy Scouts, and I loved doing that. But physical activity and being like be a man, be a boy, like that kind of stuff, it's like that wasn't who I was. I was more reserved and intellectual about stuff.
Sense.
I liked reading. I liked being
sense.
creative, and that's why I like people like Flick and Flint from Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Like I said, I'm being hard on Bug's Life because I'm trying to get at you. I don't actually.
No, I know. We're ribbing each other. It's I know. It's part of the rapport.
The reason why A Bug's Life was never one of my favorites was because when I would watch the movie, I would feel embarrassed for Flick. I would feel embarrassed for the lead character. As the lead character, I also relate to him. I also, root for him, and to watch him constantly for. I think it's fair to say the majority of the movie,
yeah, he's a screw up for most of the movie.
And to me, that was it was frustrating to watch because I just want everyone to make the right decisions all the time. But to its credit, like it's still, I think it's a testament to the fact that I think you can make a movie about anything as long as its heart is in the right place and its structure is sound. That's why you could have you could have movies like the Lego Movie. Like you can have a movie that
Lego Movie's great,
amazing, and the reason why is because it's story and its structure and its characters are all true.
You can make a movie about anything as long as it's not about Will Smith being a fish at a fish car wash.
Are you referring to Hitch?
Yes.
uh,
You mentioned characters is a huge strength, and I think that's a huge part of what makes the Pixar movies so great is that their characters are flawed. Um, Here we are talking about the heroes of our movies. I think Bug's Life has one of the best villains in a Pixar movie. I think Hopper is a fantastic villain. But that also leads into the very tricky territory, and this circles back to a conversation we were having earlier, Kevin Spacey, and how can you separate art from the artist? It's hard. Kevin Spacey gives really good performances in a lot of stuff that he's in. But as we know now, he's kind of a piece of shit.
yeah.
So
No.
how do you do that? How do you separate the art from the artist? I've kind of talked about how I have a hard time with that in H.P. Lovecraft. Do you have a difficult time with that in actors or authors and works specifically?
I have a difficult time accepting when certain entertainers that have crossed some pretty vicious lines when they continue to get work, when they continue like after the fact that they've been outed for sometimes the monsters that they are, when they continue to be celebrated like as people by continuing to be given the opportunity to create art. That's when I go like, no, I shy away from that. One of a movie that I enjoy greatly is The Usual Suspects. The Usual Suspects has the curse of not only having Kevin Spacey as a star in the movie, it's also directed by Bryan Singer, who is also not a very nice person. I think he's the director of that movie. For hideously similar reasons to Kevin Spacey. But that's something that's been in our media for a long time. That's something that involved other people. And I think it's okay to kind of accept, those characters in that story and that film as its own thing. Like, this film did not hurt anyone. It's the people behind it did. It's not a movie that I've ever seen, but when you look back at like film history, there's this rule that one of the greatest early epics that we've had is a movie that's pro KKK, which is horrifying.
Which movie is this?
The Birth of a Nation is the name of the movie. Birth of the Nation is the name of the movie. If you look on I have like these books of like classic movies you have to see before you die, and A Birth of the Nation is one of the first movies in one of the volumes of those books.
I think the reason you see lists like that, that mention movies like Birth of a Nation, I think you can look at something and appreciate it from a historical value, but not necessarily appreciate it for the message that it's trying to send. Does that make sense? Last night, I every Friday for the last few weeks, I've been watching the latest season of The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs. Joe Bob Briggs is a TV movie host personality, mostly known from the 90s and his stint on Monster Vision, which was where TNT would host a film, usually like a campy, schlocky B-movie type monster flick or horror movie, and he would give commentary between the commercial breaks. And so he got a revival series many years later on the streaming service Shudder. It's very good. He is very well versed in movie history, but he sort of subscribes to the drive-in spirit, quote unquote, of things where it's like, seedy movies, B movies, horror movies, real rotten kind of stuff, for better or for worse, either because it's campy or just because it hasn't aged well or whatever its significance was in cinema. He kind of looks at the underbelly of those things, and it's a very good show. And because he's so well versed in the history of things, you learn a lot in the course of him talking about these films between the break segments. And this week they showed a very infamous film that is widely despised among film enthusiasts, and that is Cannibal Holocaust. Now, I had seen Cannibal Holocaust in college. I did not care for it. And for those of you who have not seen it, Cannibal Holocaust is a movie that is basically a found footage film about a group of documentarians who go into the Amazon to look for a cannibalistic tribe and find them. But more so than the subject material, it's about you do see animals killed on screen, and it's very widely hated, and I hate it for that reason, is the way that they abuse animals in that film. It's trying to send a message of it's trying to send a message basically saying, like, that humans are modern humans are more savage than what we perceive as quote unquote savages out in the Amazon. And it's done by an exploitation director. And for a movie that's trying to say, like, exploitation is bad, it's using exploitation features non-ironically. It's being an exploitation film in the face of trying to condemn exploitation. So it isn't very effective in that sense either. So it kind of fails on all fronts, but I think, and they preface this, they gave like 3 disclaimers before showing the movie last night because they wanted to make sure the audience knew we're showing this for historical reasons. If you are a horror buff, if you are a film person, there is an argument to be made for you should see this movie because of the historical value. Warner Brothers did the same thing with not editing their cartoons and showing them in their collections. It's like, listen, different time. We're not saying it's right. This is a reflection. To completely erase it, though, is to basically say that it didn't happen. You were talking about separating art from the artist and appreciating a piece of media. How do you separate yourself from a work done by an artist who is, because H.P. Lovecraft is notoriously xenophobic and racist, and a lot of historians have said his inspiration for his cosmic horror stems from his own hatred of the other, so to speak, which is essentially translating to his hatred of other races and other nations. Jeepers Creepers too. Have you heard about the whole thing around Jeepers Creepers? How the director was a child predator. He did a movie called Clown House before he did Jeepers Creepers. And the character, it kind of came out later, was sort of based around him, who was this sort of predator type character. Same thing for the monster in Jeepers Creepers. So it's like, but Jeepers Creepers is very highly regarded amongst the horror community just as a standalone horror film, but not because of the director. But when you have art that is highly regarded because the artist injected themselves into it, that's when it starts to get really uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's when I have a really hard time with it, because I've enjoyed many works of H.P. Lovecraft, and I have a very hard time, and I don't have an answer, right? Like, we're not trying to answer. We're not trying to solve racism on this podcast. But I have a hard time, reconciling.
I think anybody would. I think the thing to remember is, like, when you're talking about people like H.P. Lovecraft, like, that's somebody that has been around for a long time, that has inspired many other writers, I'm sure, might even fit into the categories that he was fighting against, that he was against. It's I think back to somebody that growing up, whose material was an inspiration to me, was Bill Cosby, who is now we know, is a monster. Who, I hope never sees the outside of a jail for the rest of his life.
All 2 years.
All 2 years of it.
And actually, 2 years of it.
Won't see anything because I think he's legally blind. But
I love that movie.
Legally blind.
I'm sorry. Continue.
It's a less flashy musical. But I think, at the same time, like, that collection of stand-up that he's done, inspired countless other comedians who have not done these things,
Yeah.
who have not contributed horrors to the world. Um,
Yeah.
so in that case, I would say like there's light to the art. There's light to the art that is there. Um, there's darkness surrounding it, which we need to be careful with. But the art itself, it I think is pure. Like you are allowed to enjoy art. You can watch Seven. You can watch American Beauty and you can appreciate it for the things that they are, even if they're led by somebody who isn't nice. You can watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off and laugh at the principal in the movie, even though he
He
is
is
also
also
a
a monster.
monster.
Yeah.
You
Jeffrey
know,
Jones.
if you could listen to Super Freak by Rick James and
Hmm.
acknowledge that the late Rick James also did things in his life that are horrible and awful and all of these things. But
Yeah.
it's at the same time, it's whoever you are. If you decide you don't want to partake in some of these things that people have created because of the people that they are, like you're completely in your right to do that. And
And we've done that. I mean, there have been
yeah,
YouTubers that
that have
have
crossed our lines. We've talked about this.
come out as bad people, and we've decided
Yeah.
to turn our backs on them. But we can still, look back because it gave us fond
Yeah.
memories, right? And I guess it's about the impression that it leaves on the viewer, right? If it's leaving a positive legacy, there's some good to be derived from that because it is
Yeah.
about being in the
Yeah.
gray, right? Having listened to a lot of H.P. Lovecraft's works, one of my favorite personal pieces that I ever wrote, short form dramas, was heavily inspired by the works of Lovecraft. I don't get. And it was kind of a revelation to me when I heard that he was such a xenophobe and a racist because I never got the impression of that listening to his work. It started to make sense after the fact, and maybe that's just because I had listened to things up to that point that weren't so blatant. I guess there's some other stuff that I haven't really gotten into, but
It's possible. It's a crazy world out there. We're just
it's a crazy world, and it's not just black and white. It's about living in the gray on the pods we cast
along the way.
Along the way.
Hey, look at that! It's the name of our show.
Hey, look at that.
You do,
That
you
is
you
the
do
name
that
of
a
our
lot,
show.
Spencer. You always find ways to tie in the name of our show. Are you recording these conversations?
Oh
What?
shit! You didn't know
What are
I
you
was
talking
recording
about?
these.
Like, I've been.
Ryan, this is a podcast. Did you not know what a podcast
I
is?
thought we were fishing and eating peas in a pod. Like that's what I've been doing this whole time. I have my little fishing hole.
I'm casting them some
Yeah.
peas in a pot.
I'm podcasting. Are you putting these on the internet without?
Ryan, that was the whole point of putting
I
these on the.
told
Why do you think that I had a?
important, embarrassing stories about like my life? What are you doing? I thought you just.
And we're back. Sorry for the impromptu music break. Ryan and I had a little discussion, and he's now made fully aware that I'm recording everything that we're talking about, just like the government. And,
I have calmed down. I am wet because I've thrown all of my peas into the ocean.
What's weird is that he's recording this from the beach. I'm recording this from my apartment.
It's true. We're social distancing. I'm waving to you now.
We're
from the
social
beach.
fishing.
Hey!
Fish and sing.
That was supposed to be the title of Finding Nemo.
Social fish
But they-
and sing.
Social fist.
But
It's
that
almost-
didn't. That got a little too risque with the censors. Oh God.
All right, Spencer. I believe you have something in our our mailbag?
I do. Our mailbag. We got a suggestion from one of our listeners, Jordan, suggested that we talk about fan bases, which I think dovetails nicely into our discussion about how we take in media and movies and things. And a little teaser for next week's one of next week's subjects. One of the bits of trivia that he wanted to share on the program was that talking about fan bases, both toxic and non-toxic, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when he killed off the character Sherlock Holmes, faced so much harassment from fans and even his own mother from killing off the character that it was considered one of the first fan base coups in history. So I think that's a great topic to broach on next week's Pods We Cast along the way, talking about fan bases, both positive and negative, some good and some bad. But before we do that, Ryan, last week we talked about a suggestion that you had on the podcast for me to watch Indie Game the movie. It made me realize I didn't get a chance to suggest one to you. So this will not be a surprise because I've mentioned it before on the show, but now's as good a time as ever to talk about One Cut of the Dead.
I knew it. I knew you were gonna... Part of me thought you were going to say Cannibal Holocaust.
No, I will never. So check that out on your own time if you like, but it will make you nauseous throughout. It's not for the faint of heart if you're going to watch that movie.
Sounds like my kind of movie. I'm going to immediately forget about One Cut of the Dead. I'm going to accidentally watch
Cannibal Holocaust.
And I'm going to be like, yeah, it was a hoot.
I'll be very worried if you come back and say it was a hoot. But yeah, One Cut of the Dead. You had mentioned how Indie Game, the movie, kind of fits into a lot of my interests and sensibilities, and I think I can't stress enough. Go in knowing nothing. This is a codename Splash situation.
Okay. All right.
If you go in knowing nothing, you will come out with a lot of enjoyment. I will preface this by saying zombie movie, but it is not. It's not gory and it's not upsetting. It's a fun movie.
A fun zombie movie.
Yes.
Okay. All right. There are very few of those. Even the fun zombie movies aren't too fun.
Yeah.
Maybe there's one. Maybe Warm Bodies is kind of fun.
Warm Bodies is fun. There's Burying the X.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Shaun of the Dead, I think, is the pinnacle.
But Shaun of the Dead is hilarious, but it's not a fun movie. Like, it's a very dark movie.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I guess it is fun, but like
it's funny, heavy. But it is heavy.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
What's that word again? Heavy.
Heavy.
This is a Back to the Future podcast.
This is Back to the Future. You know what? That's the perfect time as ever to do our new outro. Thank you for listening to us on the Back to the Future podcast. I'm Spencer.
And I'm Ryan.
And where we're going,
we don't need toads.
Podcasts.
Thank you everyone for listening to this week's show. Remember to smash that like button and follow us on iTunes and Spotify. This has been the Pods We Cast along the way.